Welcome to a webcast made by the Learning Enhancement team based in the Dean of Students office at the University of East Anglia. This webcast is part of the Bridging Between Algebra and Calculus series and concerns what is a straight line. This guide discusses equations which describe straight line graphs and which are also known as linear equations. This guide will help you learn the meaning of the two important values in the equation of a straight line, the gradient and the y-intercept. It will also help you learn how to recognise equations of straight lines. Introduction. The equation of a straight line, also known as a linear equation, is a fundamental mathematical equation. It occurs in all areas of science, such as when you calculate gradients of tangents, convert units, e.g. Fahrenheit to Celsius, use the equations of motion in physics, and fit straight lines to data and statistics, linear regression. In mathematics, harder, non-linear problems are often reduced to linear problems, which can be analysed more easily. In all of these areas, and many more, one variable is related to another variable by multiplying it by a constant, just a number which does not change, and adding another, often different, constant. If the two variables are x and y, and the constants are m and c, then this can be written as the equation y equals mx plus c. The graph of any equation which fits this pattern is a straight line. The figure on the left is the graph of y equals 4x plus 5. What does this mean? It means that every point on the line in the graph here satisfies the equation y equals 4x plus 5. So the point with coordinates 1, 9 is on the line, roughly here. Because if x equals 1, then the equation satisfies that y equals 4 times 1 plus 5, which is 9. Therefore, 1, 9 satisfies a straight line equation with m equals 4 and c equals 5. You can find out more about graphs in the study guide, Plotting Graphs by Hand. In this guide you will learn to interpret the constant m as the gradient of the line and c as the y-intercept. You will also learn how to recognise linear equations, and you will be introduced to 4 special straight line equations. If you want to learn more, you can also look at the study guides, Finding Equations of Straight Lines and Sketching Straight Lines. Note: in some disciplines such as economics, you may see the straight line equation written as y equals a plus bx, with a being the y-intercept and b being the gradient. Equation of a straight line through the origin. Look at the graph on the right. How can this graph be described using algebra? In this example, the point with the coordinates 0, 0, the origin, here, is on the line, the cross at the bottom left of the graph. In other words, the point where x equals 0 and y equals 0 is on the graph. Also, the point 3, 12 is on the graph. Here, the straight line will go through this point, which is where x equals 3 and y equals 12, the cross on the top right of the graph. In fact, if you take any number, call it x, and multiply it by 4, and call the result y, you will get a point on this graph. You could write that y is equal to 4 multiplied by x. Y is equal to 4x, which is in the form y equals mx plus c, with m equals 4 and c equals 0. In other words, it is of the form y equals mx, and this is the equation of a straight line through the origin. Another way of looking at this is to imagine a steep mountain where, if you go 1 kilometre due east, then you will climb 4 kilometres up. In the language of mathematics, you can say that the gradient of this mountain is 4. For the equation y equals 4x, the gradient of the graph is 4, and in the straight line equation this corresponds to the constant m. Importantly, the gradient of the graph does not change, it is always 4. This is why the graph of y equals 4x is a straight line. By definition, a straight line is a graph which has a constant gradient, m. Example, interpret the graph of V equals I times R, Ohm's law. This is the equation used in electronics to relate the voltage V and the current I in a circuit with a constant resistance R. Mathematically, this is a straight line and the gradient is given by the value of R. The graph shows lines for two different values of R. 5 ohms here and 2 ohms here. The line V equals 5i is steeper than the one for V equals 2i since the gradient is larger. As the gradient m gets more positive, the slope of a graph gets steeper uphill. As a gradient m gets more negative, the slope of the graph gets steeper downhill. The general equation of a straight line. If the graph of y equals 4x, see previous section, was translated up by 5, then it would no longer go through the origin, but it would go through the point 0, 5. Adding 5 to all the y values also moves them all up by 5. So the equation of this line would be y equals 4x plus 5, and this is the graph on the first page of this guide. This equation is of the form y equals mx plus c. In fact, this is the general equation of all straight lines that do not necessarily go through the origin. In this equation, m is the gradient, as you saw in the previous section, and c is the value of y when x equals 0. If you substitute x equals 0 into the general equation of a straight line, you get y equals m multiplied by 0 plus c, which equals c. In other words, when x equals 0, y equals c. As the y-axis is the line on a graph where x always equals 0, the value c is known as the y-intercept, because this is the value of y where the line intercepts, goes through, the y-axis. Any straight line that goes through the origin intercepts the y-axis at y equals c, and so c equals 0 for all lines that go through the origin. This means that, for lines that go through the origin, the equation of a straight line is y equals mx, as stated in the previous section. Identifying straight lines. In mathematics, equations represent graphs, and more complicated equations have more complicated graphs. For example, the graph of y equals x squared is a parabola. See study guide, Quadratic Functions. And the graph of y equals sine x is a wave. See fact sheet, 5 basic functions. In these graphs, the gradient is not constant, but changing. A parabola's gradient goes from negative to positive, or vice versa. A wave oscillates repeatedly. As you have seen, straight line graphs have a constant gradient. To see if an equation is that of a straight line, a linear equation, you need to find if it fits the pattern y equals mx plus c. Sometimes you may need to rearrange an equation and make y the subject to find this out. You should read the study guide, Rearranging Equations, if you find this difficult. Example, does the equation y equals 5 minus x over 2 represent a straight line? This equation can be rewritten as y equals minus a half x plus 5. And so it is a straight line with m equals minus a half and c equals 5. See the graph to the right. You can see that the slope is downhill, as m is negative, and the line passes through the point 0, 5. Example, does the equation y equals 5 minus 2 over x represent a straight line? It does not matter how this is rearranged. This equation will never be in the form y equals mx plus c, and so no, this is not the equation of a straight line. In fact, it is a hyperbola. Example, does the equation 4x minus 2y plus 7 equals 0 represent a straight line? Rearranging the equation to make y the subject gives y equals 2x plus 7 over 2, which fits the pattern of y equals mx plus c with m equals 2 and c equals 7 over 2. And so the equation represents a straight line with gradient of 2 and y-intercept of 7 over 2. In the last example, the equation is made up of a number multiplied by x plus a number multiplied by y plus another number which are set equal to 0. In general, such equations look like ax plus by plus c equals 0. In the example above, a equals 4, b equals minus 2, and c equals 7. There are no indices on the x or the y, trigonometric functions or other functions in the equation. It is made up of just adding together numbers and multiples of x and y. These equations are called linear equations. Linear equations can always be converted into the form y equals mx plus c, and so their graphs are straight lines. Useful straight lines to remember. There are 4 very common straight line graphs that you should be able to recognise and draw. The graph of y equals x has a gradient m of 1, a y-intercept of c of 0, and a graph that looks like this. The graph of y equals minus x has a gradient m of minus 1, a y-intercept of 0, and a graph that looks like this. An equation of y equals a constant, for example y equals 3, has a gradient of 0, and in this case a y-intercept of 3, and a graph that looks like this, a horizontal line. An equation of x equals a constant, for example x equals 3, has an undefined gradient and an undefined y-intercept, but has a graph that is a vertical line. The graph of y equals x has a gradient of m equals minus 1. In other words, as you go along 1 unit to the right, you go up 1 unit. This also means that the graph is at 45 degrees to the horizontal. The gradient is positive, so the straight line goes upwards. It also passes through the origin, so c equals 0. The graph of y equals minus x has a gradient m equals minus 1. In other words, as you go along 1 unit to the right, you go down 1 unit. This also means that the graph is at minus 45 to the horizontal. The gradient is negative, so the straight line goes downwards. It also passes through the origin, so c equals 0. The graph of y equals 3, in the table this is an example of y equals a constant, passes through 0, 3, and so has c equals 3, and it has a gradient of 0. If you go along 1 unit, you do not go up or down. It is flat. If m is 0, then the straight line is horizontal. A very important example of this type of straight line is the x-axis, which is the line y equals 0. The graph of x equals a constant, the example of x equals 3 is given in the table, is unusual. It is a linear equation and its graph is a straight line, but the gradient is not defined. You might think of the gradient as infinite, but this is not quite right for subtle mathematical reasons. You can talk to a learning enhancement tutor if you would like to know more about this. If you go along any distance at all, you go down or up an infinite distance, like falling off or climbing a vertical cliff. So, it never crosses the y-axis and has no y-intercept, unless it is the y-axis, which has an infinite number of intercepts. The y-axis is a very important example of this type of line and has the equation x equals 0. Further guidance and information. If you have any further questions about mathematical skills or would like to discuss any other aspects of mathematics, you can talk to your lecturer or personal advisor or make an appointment to see a learning enhancement tutor in the Dean of Students office. You can telephone 01603 592761, email dos.help@uea.ac.uk, or visit our website at www.uea.ac.uk/dos/let. There are further resources on many other aspects of numeracy, mathematics, statistics and science available from the Dean of Students office and on its website. These include questions to practice, model solutions and webcasts illustrating essential skills. This guidance is one of a series on mathematics produced by the Dean of Students office at the University of East Anglia.